Let's start at the label step within the LID methodology. In the label step, the goal is to label the tables within the existing data architecture that uniquely represent a person's traits, behaviors, and any supporting tables associated to those. But remember this, the real-time customer profile always defines a person, their traits, and/or their associated behaviors with a brand or company. The primary entity, the core of the real-time customer profile, is always composed of two classes: XDM individual profile, the traits of a person, and XDM experience event, the behaviors of a person. Additionally, there's dimensional entity data. Think of this like lookups that are used to provide additional context to either a trait or a behavior of a person. Any data that exists outside the primary or the dimensional entities of the profile must be denormalized back into their parent tables, which we'll do in a later step as part of the LID process. So, how are we going to work with the LID methodology? I'm going to use the following two diagrams throughout the various lectures to demonstrate how we can apply it. To start, we first must identify as part of the label step the main table within the ERD that represents the individual profile. And we're going to label this with a P. This table is meant to uniquely describe the traits of a person. Think passport, and be the focal point of the whole entity relationship diagram itself. The customer table in this case seems to be the best fit at this definition, given it has the attributes that uniquely identify a person, and therefore it's labeled with a P. Next, we want to label all the related experience event tables that are tied back to the individual profile table that was just labeled. Experience event tables should describe the interactions or touch points a person has with a brand or a company. These are the actions that someone is taking. These tables will also likely contain some identifier that will relate it back to the main table that you labeled previously. In this case, the sales transaction table is really the only table that appears to describe a behavior a person might take purchasing something. And it's conveniently also directly relates back to the table that was previously labeled with a P. Therefore, we would label the sales transaction table with an E to represent it's an experience event-based table. The final step is to label any tables that act as lookups. Remember, that's to say that they're directly providing additional information about either the person's traits and/or that person's behaviors. These tables can only be one hop away from the primary entity tables, and they'll usually be identifiable because a relationship, when read from the parent table, in this case the P or the E, will always be defined as a many to one. The only two tables looking at this diagram that fit this definition are the product and store tables. To validate this, you can read the relationship as so. One record from the sales transaction table can relate to one product. Likewise, one record from the sales transaction table can relate to one store. In this case, both tables would be labeled with an L, representing that they're assisting in describing the behavior, in this case, of a sales transaction. There are no other lookup tables at this point, and so we can conclude the label step. All right, so let's do a quick recap of what the label step is all about. In label, the first thing we did is we went and found the main table within the ERD that represented an individual profile, and we simply labeled that with a P. Remember, it's supposed to be the focal point of the diagram. Next, we went and looked for anything that represented a behavior of a person, and we labeled any of those tables with an E. The hint here was any event table usually is directly related back to the table that you labeled previously as part of a profile. And last, we went and looked for any of the tables that are directly related back to one of those profile or event tables. Remember, these are always one hop away, so they have to be directly related, as the profile doesn't support two hops away. When we're done, we should have a diagram that has a P, a couple E's, and a few L's. And that is the label step as part of LID.